The Atlanta Hawks are a very confusing team for me to understand, and honestly kind of have been for the last couple of years, because on any given night they can do what they did tonight and beat any team in basketball. I mean, impressive win on the road against, at the time, the 17-1 Cavs, giving them their only second loss of the season behind Trae Young's 22 assists. Incredibly impressive win by a team that, like I said, on any given night looks like they can beat anybody, but they also can lose to anybody. And they just seem to be, I mean, honestly, the most mediocre team in basketball over the past few years. They're always hovering right at or around 500. In fact, last season, I believe, or maybe it was the season before, they spent like a very large chunk of the season either one game above, one game below, or right at 500. They're just super mediocre. And I have a hard time understanding this team because I'm not sure I see the path forward to contention, but I'm also not totally sure that I see a path to change the roster all that much because I'm not sure. I mean, Trae Young is one of the more confusing players to me in the entire sport, to be completely honest. And amazing win tonight against the Cavs gives me an opportunity to talk about this Hawks team, but I'm not going to lie, despite the impressive win, this is not going to be all a positive video. Hope you all are excited, though. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Help me push towards the 1,000 subscriber mark on this channel, trying to get it monetized. Would really appreciate it if y'all do subscribe, especially if you're new to the channel. Without further ado, let's hop right into it. So let's start by talking about the win tonight. They deserve a lot of credit for this very, very feisty, impressive, competitive win. Trae finishes with 20 points and 22 assists. Did have 5 turnovers, but when you have 22 assists, you can turn the ball over pretty much as you want. And people ain't going to be too mad about you about it when you're having the most assists that any player in the NBA has had this year. And again, another very impressive, very solid performance from Jalen Johnson, who is honestly probably their best player. Definitely an unorthodox, or not unorthodox, but impressive shooting night for the Hawks that I think was the biggest catalyst in them scoring 135 points and winning this game. 47.6% from three as a team tonight, for a team that prior to that was shooting 34% as a team this season, which is the 9th worst mark in the league. A definitely abnormal shooting night for the Hawks was a big contributor to them winning this game, because despite Trae's only 3 of 13, everybody else on the team went a total of 17 for 29, which is incredible. Just unbelievable, unsustainable efficiency from the 3-point line to get a very impressive win over a very, very good Cavs team. At the same time, they're 8-11. They're one of the most just like mediocre, playing almost a guaranteed type teams in the East. To most of the time, I don't feel like they're a team that looks like a top 6 seed. And even in a weak Eastern Conference, I think you kind of have the top 5 seeds pretty clear already. It's going to be Celtics, Cavs in some order, and then the 3 through 5 is going to be the Knicks, the Bucks, and the Magic in some order. So that 6th seed is really the only guaranteed out of the play-in spot that's available. And I don't trust the Hawks to be good enough to seriously contend for the 6th seed. But yet, there are games and there are matches where they look like they can truly beat anybody. And we see it against Boston. It feels like almost every year they come out and hoop and play really well. And I got to say, I liked the trade of DeJounte Murray this offseason. Getting Dyson Daniels plus multiple picks plus Larry Nance was an absolute haul. Dyson Daniels has been awesome. He's been the best defensive guard in the league this year. And even he shot 2 or 3 from 3 tonight, which is definitely his biggest flaw, is his inability to shoot the ball at a high level. But he shot really well from the 3-point line. Risa Shea has been one of the worst shooters in the entire league so far this season, and yet I kind of like him as a player. I understand it's the number 1 overall pick. You'd like to see more efficient production, but I do think he's actually a pretty good all-around player who's going to give the Hawks a lot of versatility and a lot of talent for a long time. Jalen Johnson is probably realistically their best overall player in terms of being a true two-way guy who is a very good rebounder, great passer, really good scorer, can shoot the 3 at a high level, does a lot of things very well. They got a legitimate center duo in Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu that provides 2 really athletic rim rockers who are very, very capable players in their own right. I think Okongwu is better than Clint, and I see why he played more minutes tonight, and I'm kind of surprised that he doesn't start at this point on this team anyway. Capella was probably their worst player tonight. 1 of 7 is just not going to cut it. But at the same time, this is a team where you're like, you look at the pieces and you're like, I mean, I see the vision a little bit, but they're not high end enough in terms of talent to compete with the best teams, at least in a series type situation even in the Eastern Conference. And Trae Young is just one of those players to me who I feel like you either love him or you hate him. And yet I'm not really in either of those camps because he is truly one of the best playmakers in the entire sport. I mean, he's an incredible passer, is really, really good at getting his teammates involved on the offensive end of the court at times. But he's also way more inefficient, not just this season, but for his career, than you would expect out of a primary scoring point guard, especially with the performances that we've seen out of Trae Young making the conference finals in his second season, being an absolute superstar at Oklahoma in college. And yet the efficiency, even this year, it's 38% from the field, 33% from three, just not what you want to see at all out of your lead superstar guy, but he's averaging 12 assists a game. And so he's one of the best playmakers in the sport. Now, does he turn the ball over too much? Yes, he does, but it doesn't take away from how great of a playmaker he is. But he just has never really developed into that next level great scorer, and maybe his size contributes to that, but the shooting is right around 35% for his career. And when you look at this Hawks roster, I think shooting is their biggest issue because Jalen Johnson, good three-point shooter, not shooting amazing this year, but he's a good shooter. Dyson Daniels has never been a good shooter. DeAndre Hunter has never been a great shooter. Zachary Rissache looks really bad shooting the three ball for the most part this year. Bogdanovich has always been a good shooter, but he's not shooting great to this point. Okongwu, I mean, he's shooting threes, but he's not shooting them with efficiency. And everybody else in this group is pretty much a real non-shooter, non-factor. Now, Larry Nance Jr., I think he's played really well in the minutes he's played for the Hawks, but he hasn't played much. He's been a DNP CD, actually, several of these last few games. But overall, this team is so meh. And I don't feel like Trae Young's trade value realistically is all that high, which is interesting to say for a guy who is as electric a playmaker and at times scorer as he can be, but the efficiency is too bad. He is honestly, I feel like, a little bit too ball dominant of a player. And a guy making as much money as Trae Young is, who has to dominate the offense to be effective, I feel like, and is a really, really poor defender, is a guy who is a very talented player, but also I feel like a hard to trade asset. I don't feel like if the Hawks wanted to trade Trae Young and rebuild in a different way, that they would actually be able to get as much as they would want out of him. And it puts them in a very weird spot. I feel like in a bit of limbo where with Trae, they're never really going to be good enough to contend in the Eastern Conference unless things truly break absolutely perfectly the way that they did a few years ago. And I believe that was 2021. But outside of that, realistically, the Hawks are just, they're going to be middling for a long time, but I don't think trading Trae Young is something that's really in the minds of the front office too much. And even if it was, I have a hard time seeing that they actually would get the amount of value that they would realistically want for him. And that puts them in a really weird spot with a talented roster with a lot of young guys and a lot of contributors, but yet a lack of shooting for the most part and a lack of true consistency on the offensive or defensive end of the court. I feel like this team kind of lacks identity a little bit. And, I mean, they got an opportunity here, big win tonight against the Cavs. Maybe they can potentially start to build upon some of this recent win. Now, before that, they had lost 3 games in a row, but they've also beat the Celtics this season. Like I said, they always seem to play the Celtics well. They beat the Celtics already this year, but the schedule isn't like super duper hard for the most part because, again, they play in a weaker Eastern Conference. And I feel like they do get some tough games coming up here in the near future. But if they can float through these next several games at a pretty high level, they're going to get, I think, a schedule that, while not super duper easy, is going to set up a bit favorably for them to have a lot of success as the season progresses and be a serious contender in that Eastern Conference playoff picture. But I just don't think they're a contender for anything else other than that. And that's a weird and uncomfortable spot to be in, I think, as a roster that the Hawks find themselves in right now, where I just don't know what direction is the right direction to go for the future, nor how to effectively get towards that direction with the pieces on this roster, whether it be trying to rebuild without Trae and find a new identity or trying to maximize Trae, which feels like it has a very capped ceiling at this point in his career. This is a weird team with a lot of questions to me. So congratulations on the impressive win against Cleveland, but I'm not convinced the Hawks are much more than a play-in team. And I'm not sure how they get out of that play-in purgatory that it feels like they've been in the last couple of years, where they've just been super mediocre every single season. That is going to do it for this video. I hope y'all did enjoy. If y'all did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. I'll be back with more NBA content very, very soon, and I appreciate y'all. Peace.